Alright, we are talking about factoring by grouping. And, so remember factors mean two things that multiply to a bigger thing. In this case, we're going to find two binomials that multiply together to this 4-term polynomial right here. So, grouping means you're going to group it into two groups of two. Watch this. So you have first two things go together, and the second two things go together. Now before you begin, you should always make sure your polynomial is in descending order, or this is just not going to group correctly. So descending order means my exponents start out really big, 3, go down smaller, 2, a little smaller, 1, and then none. So again, your descending order should always be the start, or things just aren't going to line up properly. Of those first two terms, so they go together, we're going to just pull out the GCF of those two things. So if I have 3x's in that first term, and 2x's in the second term, then they have 2x's in common, x squared. Now what's left over when you pull out that x squared? Well, of my 3, I only have 1x left because 2 are out there. And of my 3x squared, I only have the 3 left because my x squared is outside now. Alright, next thing. Take a look at these. If that first thing is positive, if that says plus, you pull out that plus. Okay? And now we got to figure out the GCF of 5x and 15. They both do not have x's, so there should be no variables here. But a 5, does that go into 15? Yes, it does. Always test your lower into the higher and see if that works out. When I pull out that positive 5, what's left over? I just have an x left in my first term, and 15 divided by that 5 is 3. So if I multiply that back together, I get that term right there. Alright, notice what's happening here. This is actually really smart. We got the same thing in both parentheses. So, we are actually going to now pull out a GCF of these two terms, this binomial, of x plus 3. So there's our first factor, x plus 3. And your second factor is what's left over. So what's left over is the outside stuff. So look at it here. We've got this x squared, and we've got this positive 5. And there you go. You have factored your first polynomial, and you are done. Alright, let's try our next one here. This one has some negatives in it, just to make it a little harder. Don't worry though, I'm right here to help you out. So make sure that is in descending order. 3, 2, 1, none. So your exponents start high, go down. Now we're going to put the first two things together and the second two things together. Between 8 and 64, does your smaller one go into your larger? And yes, it does. 8 goes into 64. Now what about your y's? You've got 3 of them, and you've got 2 of them. So they have 2 y's in common. When you pull that out, what's left over? I've got my 8 outside, I've got 2 of my y's outside, so I just have that third y left inside. My negative 64 divided by 8 is negative 8, and I already took both my y's outside. Now y, see how that has a positive there? Make sure you bring that down, whatever the sign is right here, bring it down. Now, y and 8 have nothing in common. This one doesn't have any variables, this one doesn't have any coefficients. But they always have a 1 in common no matter what. So if you think there's nothing, there's always a 1. And then, that works out because when I pull out that 1, nothing changes. I get y minus 8 right there too. So I have two factors. Do you remember where to find them? Your first factor is the thing that repeated, y minus 8. And your second factor is the stuff that's outside here, waiting to go. 8y squared plus 1. And there you go. Done. Alright, let's try another one. This one is not in the correct order to start with. So we need to put it in descending order. So it should start with our 3. So that, see how that says positive 24? We're going to say positive 24 x cubed. Then we're going to go to our positive 15x squared. Next biggest one is negative 56x. And finally, the negative 35. So this negative right here is going to throw in a new level for this. So be ready for it. So let's start with factor by grouping. Take the first two and the second two. Of my first two, what GCF do they have? So you're thinking of the biggest number that goes into both 24 and 15. 15 does not go into 24, but what about 5? Nope. What about 3? There it is. So 3 goes into both of those. Now if I have 3 x's in one and 2 x's in the other, then they both have 2 to give. So x squared, 3x squared is our GCF. When I pull that out, 24 divided by 3, that's 8. had 3 x's, 2 are out here, so only have 1 left. Next I have 15 divided by 3, that's positive 5. And I already took both of my x squareds out. So before we were always pulling down the sign, now we still have to. So make sure you pull down that negative. And now we have to figure out what goes into both 56 and 35. Well, not much goes into 35, but I know 5 and 7 do. And 7 also goes into 56. So let's pull out that 7. They don't both have x's, so you can't pull out any variables. You also have a cheat when you get to the second half. You already know what you're supposed to be getting in those parentheses, so sometimes that can help you out, or maybe catch an error in that first one if you're getting something else out for the second one. Alright, we're ready for the different part. So when we pull out the 7, because this was a negative here, I now need to divide everything by negative 7. So negative 56 divided by negative 7 is positive 8 with that x still right there. And now my negative 35 divided by negative 7 turns that to a positive 5. So I got the same thing in both those parentheses. Good, that's my first factor. Now let's try my second factor. Remember, it's the stuff on the outside. So 3x squared minus 7, and that is done. Now before we move on to another lesson, let me just show you when this might fail, because sometimes it looks like everything is working, but it's really not. So the first thing, cubed, squared, 1, none. It's already in that descending order that we like. Starts with big exponents, works its way down. And you go and you start grouping this off. You look and you say, hey, both of these are divisible by 3, and they have 2 x's in common. When you take that away, you get 1x right there, and you get a positive 3 left over. Pull down your plus. 7 and 14. This looks like everything's going well. You pull out the 7, and then suddenly you get an x plus a 2. Obviously, first you should always go back and check and make sure you didn't make a math error. But if you're getting different things right here, then this is actually not factorable at all. So if you get different things in those parentheses and it wasn't a math error on your part, this is not factorable. And sometimes that happens where I give you things that are just not possible to factor, and that's what you have to say. Alright? Alright, I think we're done with that page? Yep. Alright.